Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RTD news updates. And as you can tell from today's title, Banco Popular collapses and is sold for €1. We're going to be talking about some really important stuff that's happening in Spain right now as one bank comes to an end, being bailed in by another bank that is a competitor and a rival bank. And so actually, before we dive into today's articles, I have about 5 or so articles. I want to direct your attention to the RTD University page. If you are not familiar with Rethinking a Dollar, I like to interview a lot of experts on monetary matters as well as financial information that can be informative to helping you rethink the dollar. So the link for that is down below. Other than that, let's get into today's articles. So as I mentioned, I have a couple articles I want to share with you, all dealing with the current crisis that I consider happening right now in Spain with the whole bailing in of a bank by another bank due to the fact that it was basically categorized as not being worth saving. And so here, the first article here is from actually a Spanish news article, and it's from Capital Radio, and it's entitled Banco Popular, the biggest bail-in in history, dealing with Spanish history. The next one here is the top 10 banks with the largest assets and profits in Spain. And this link here is actually from last summer, giving you the top 10 banks in Spain, of which Banco Popular was number 5 at the time. And the next one here is from Reuters, and this is actually from last week, where this gentleman here to my over my shoulder here was basically telling his staff and employees, as well as those invested in the bank, to stay calm, that everything will be worked out or everything will be okay. And then here we have the young lady here who today, as they said in this article here, spent all night trying to figure out exactly how to, resolve this whole issue here. And it ended up being they end up purchasing the bank for basically $1 and then taking on all their problems. And then the next article here is giving a little explanation of how all this went down. And then the very last article here from New York Times, and talks about how this Banco Popular situation, how it was a bank that was not really worth saving according to their measurements. It's not the worst bank out of them all. And it mentions that there's some banks in Italy as well as in Greece that are probably in much worse shape that have not been bailed out or bailed in yet. So interesting things here. So let's dive through these things briefly. And as always, I like to leave the information down below for you so you can dive into it more deeper and in depth for yourself. So just to skim it on top, it says Banco Popular, the biggest bail-in in history. And here we have the president of Santander giving a speech. And then a gentleman here basically is a CEO of AFI. And he's quoted as saying, the internal bailout of Banco Popular is the biggest bail-in in history. Then he goes on to say how it's good for the country, of which at the end of the day, I don't really see how that is, being that that's one of the biggest banks they have there that was basically on the verge of collapse or is collapsing. And so just it's interesting how it's considered the biggest bailout in history in Spain. And then the next article here is from a website, Ibenisto, and it gives you an idea of just the top 10 banks in that country, and one being Santander. And so we scroll through here. So we have Banco Santander, we have BBVA, Bankia, Banco Sabadell, and then we have the next one is Banco Popular. And then we have number 6, 7, 8, and all the way down to 9 and 10. So it leads me to believe that if the fifth bank of the biggest bank in the country basically has collapsed and is not worth anything, what about the banks that are below that and the banks that are right above that? What type of financial shape are they in? Which will lead me to, guess and to kind of come to the conclusion that their whole banking sector in general in Europe is probably not doing too well, being that Santander is now taking on all of the bad lending practices and bad loans that Bank Popular was having problems with. So something worth considering. The next article is from Reuters, and here we have the president here mentioning how he tells everyone to stay calm. So I'll read some of that briefly. And it says the chairman of Banco Popular has told his executives that the struggling Spanish lender was solvent and urged them to remain calm and confident. So as of last week, end of the week, he was telling his executives or whatnot to stay calm because they were solvent. And then within the last couple of days, something changed drastically due to the fact that their market share has been dwindling down and depositors have been withdrawing money. I read an article somewhere where millions per day were just being taken out because depositors were concerned that they would lose their money. And so it says Popular shares fell almost 40% in the past 3 days on concern it would not find a buyer or raise new capital to fix its balance sheet, which is weighed down to 37 billion euros or $41 billion on non-performing real estate assets. So, the whole idea that this bank is having problems is based on the fact that they are carrying so much debt from the prior crisis with the Spanish housing market that went belly up, that they weren't able to basically, stay liquid enough to, counteract some of the losses that they're taking with those bad loans, which in my opinion is the case for all of these banks, being that nothing was really solved. It was more so patched up with, banks taking on all this bad debt and the ECB kind of washing things under the rug with bailouts to certain banks that had more problems than others. But just to give you an idea of what else is going on here, it says Elke Kenon, who chairs the EU's Single Resolution Board, a body that resolves struggling banks, had issued an early warning, according to the EU official. The SRB said that at that time it could not confirm the story. It says Spanish government said on Friday it was not worried about Popular and would await the outcome of the sales process, which the bank said it could extend past June 10th offer deadline. So we didn't even make it to June 10th before the bank was sold. It says Spain's biggest bank, Santander, and state-owned lender Bankia, is seen as the most likely buyers for an acquisition. A capital increase, which analysts say would need to raise at least 3 billion euros, faces a resistance from shareholders who fear a greater dilution. So just give an idea of, the idea. This was all last week prior to things happening right now. And then here we go to today's article from Financial Times. And it actually gives a breakdown of how, I guess since last night or Tuesday night in Europe, her team as well as some other people as part of the SRB were gathering, as they say, all through the night to kind of put together what would it cost to basically take over Banco Popular, or more so bail it in within the country using one of their own banks. And I'll give you an idea of what they're talking about. It says less than 24 hours earlier, Europe's new authority for dealing with failing banks, the Single Resolution Board, had given Santander and about 30 other interested parties until the next morning to submit their final bids for Popular. So, 30 banks or 30 interested parties as well as Santander were supposed to be, coming together with a package to bail out the Banco Popular. It says the bank worked through the night lining up underwriters for a $7 billion share issue to fund the deal and securing approval from the U.S. Federal Reserve. Bank Popular has a small branch in Florida. It says Santander was sold shortly before 6 a.m. today on Wednesday that it offered to buy the banks for only €1 had been accepted. It was signed an hour later. So basically all that negotiating through the night, trying to come up with some funds to counteract the losses that Banco Popular is experiencing, and they sold it for €1. Then it goes on to give you an idea of just Santander's current status and some of the things that their president has been going through as far as getting their bank back up to par enough so much to be able to purchase Banco Popular. And it shows a little dip here in the whole Spanish market and how they seem to be recovering. And so it goes on with some more stats and things like that on the financial condition and financial shape of Santander. So just interesting to see how, the biggest bank in Spain appears to be healthy, was able to take on the fifth largest bank and to just relieve them of all their concerns. Not really mentioning much about Santander's concerns, being that I'm sure they're in the same boat as far as having a lot of loans that are not being repaid, which is causing a lot of problems. And so next one here is from Reuters. And it says, EB triggers overnight Santander rescue of Spain's Banco Popular. So it goes on to give some of those other information, but yet it gives some more details as into actual figures. And it says, owner of Popular bond faces losses of some 2 billion euros, while Santander will ask its shareholders for around 7 billion euros of capital to absorb Spain's sixth biggest bank, according to this here. It says Popular's rescue was unveiled as the ECB announced the lender was set to be wound down, echoing a banking crash some 5 years ago that cost Spain 40 billion euros. So there was a prior banking crisis in Spain, which led to an ECB bailout of, I want to say, 41 billion total to kind of get them through that. And so what's interesting here, says Popular's rescue was unveiled. Oh, actually before that, it says owner of Popular bond faces losses of some 2 billion euros. So, if you're an investor in the Banco Popular at this current moment, I'm sure there's a lot of people that's not too happy, being that they're going to suffer some losses. So there's going to be some write-downs and write-offs of investors / depositors / unsecured shareholders of some of the what they thought was an asset on their part, which actually is a liability for that bank, which will be written off as a part of this whole merger / sell-off. So there's going to be a lot of people who will lose some things that they thought they had in that bank. So that's just something to take in mind when you are considering the idea that, having your entire life savings in a bank, especially just considered too big to fail. And if this is the fifth or sixth largest bank in Spain, it's failed. That lets me know that banks here in the United States of America is not too big that they can't fail. And if that happens, then, I'm sure all hell will break loose. So the very last article here is from New York Times, and it's Santander rescue troubled rival in test of Europe new rules. And so basically it's a long article giving more of the same details, but what makes this article very interesting is the fact that as you scroll down towards the bottom, it talks a lot about just the fact that Banco Popular is not really the worst bank that the ECB has to deal with. And so they're kind of picking and choosing how they categorize banks that are, not worth saving, and banks that are disposable for the most part. And so it talks about Monte dei Paschi, which is an Italian bank that's a lot older and is apparently carrying a lot more of a debt load than Banco Popular. And it's also a bank that's on the verge of collapse, but yet it's something that they're trying to work through to actually bail out, as far as give money to loan money to. So it goes to show how this monetary system game is all rigged for the most part to keep itself running smoothly, not really taking into consideration the depositors and the investors into those banks that are, in past years were used to receiving returns upon their money. But it's good to say that in the European areas, a lot of those banks are already in the negative as far as charging you to hold their money. So that would lead me to wonder, at the end of the day, what's the point of actually having all your money in a bank, being that the banking sector is experiencing massive amounts of trouble right now as we speak, being that they're not too profitable, they're carrying lots of debt in the form of bad loans that they got themselves into. And then at the end of the day, they're not solvent enough to be able to handle these losses, which means they're going to be coming for some extra money from somewhere. And so that basically means your money, my money, is on a hook as being bailed in, coming soon to a bank near you, when all these banks begin to unravel and can't, solve their own problems. They're just, for the most part, casinos that gamble amongst one another at the expense of their depositors. So wanted to share this information with you. I thought this is very telling of times we're living in when it comes to the banking sector and how they're basically gambling amongst themselves, making a fool of the public and the depositors in these banks that really believe that their funds are there and they're safe. So just something to learn from what's happening in Spain. And so my beliefs, as well as my guests from all the people I've interviewed, lets me know that this situation is just not an isolated event. It will happen all throughout Europe as well as here in the U.S. So something worth thinking about. Other than that, hope all is well. If you're new to RTD, click the subscribe button. Look forward to bringing you more news and interviews in the future. Enjoy your day.